began exercising Treasury's authority to take extraordinary measures to prevent a default back in August. Is that correct?
Yes, the debt limit, the suspension expired on August 1st, and we began using extraordinary measures to remain under the debt ceiling.
But those extraordinary measures are just a Band-Aid for a period of time, right?
Well, as I indicated, we expect them to be exhausted on October 18th.
And it would be a disaster if we did not.
It would be a catastrophe if Congress failed to raise the debt ceiling.
So here's the deal for Republicans. Democrats control the House and the Senate and the White House. And since January 20th, the approach of this Congress is that they do not need Republican votes to do anything. That's been the approach. And now they want the political cover in the midst of this massive amount of new spending to have Republicans raise the debt ceiling. That's really the request. So here's my question to you, Secretary Yellen. For the seat you sit in, do you care whether or not the debt limit is raised with Republican votes, or do you just care if it's raised?
I think it's important that this be done on a bipartisan basis. I think it should be bipartisan in recognition of the fact that both Republican administrations and Congresses and Democratic ones have run budget deficits for most of the post-war period, with only a few years serving as an exception. And that requires, on a regular basis, raising the debt ceiling. It is not about the need to do so, has nothing to do with future spending or tax plans that haven't been enacted.
So in this circumstance,
it's necessary to pay our bills.
I understand,
and
Secretary.
That's something that Republicans and Democrats need to share that responsibility.
Secretary Yellen, I've been a part of every single debt ceiling increase for the last decade, every fiscal consequence of Congress, and some of them have been very bad, but I've tried to make things better. I've been a part of the solution for the last decade, and the call that I received from you last week was the first outreach I've had from this administration to do something on a bipartisan basis, and you called me to raise the debt ceiling. Not with a plan, not for a fiscal plan, not for my buy-in, but simply for my vote. And that, to me, speaks volumes. Now, I'm grateful for the outreach from you, but it speaks to the larger issue for the administration. And I don't envy the position you're in. I don't. Because the bad strategy from this White House and the leadership of this House and the Senate is showing they don't want Republican votes. We did bipartisan bills last Congress, and in the midst of COVID, bipartisan bills, major bipartisan bills. We can work together in a responsible manner, but to ask for my vote the week before it comes up in the House is not in keeping with the realities of the situation. Well, we have the tools, we have the votes to get this thing done through Congress. It's just a question of who votes for it.
I would like to point out that in 2017, when the White House and both houses of Congress were controlled by Republicans, and a reconciliation bill was in progress that led to the 2017 tax cuts, the debt ceiling was raised, and it was done in a bipartisan basis.
In 11 and 13, I voted for a bill that President Obama signed. So I'm willing to participate in a bipartisan way. It's just a question of who votes for it in the circumstances of $7 trillion of new spending this year.
Sink into the abyss of a new dark age.
Gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks, who is also the chair of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I got to just say this, I'm kind of shocked at the ranking member, McHenry, saying that because he wasn't asked for a vote, something is going to determine whether or not American people, Democrats and Republicans, will suffer if we don't raise this debt ceiling. And I've been here for 22 years, between whether it's Democratic or Republican administrations. And each time, when it came to the credit of the United States and our economy, it didn't make a difference to me whether or not the administration was Democratic or Republican, or whether or not someone called me to ask me for my vote. I'm here to try to do the best thing for the American people, not play politics. And when it comes to the credit for the United States and the economy moving on, it's not about who's the president or who called and asked me for a vote. It's about doing the right thing for the American people, Democrats and Republicans, and moving up this debt to making sure that we don't default on our debts is essential to that. And it's essential to our responsibility as members of Congress, and not to say, oh, nobody called me for a vote. That's simply not our responsibility. Now, Madam Secretary, there are consequences if we don't pass and increase the debt ceiling. I mean, like the increase in the cost of borrowing for a home or a car or through one's credit cards, of which folks will say on the other side, I don't have to deal with that, but then it's going to be, play politics with it. So I was wondering, as we are recovering from this economy, what setbacks will a default on debt cost American households, be they Democratic, Republican, independent, non-voters? What cost would it cost us?
Well, I think it would be catastrophic for the economy and for individual families. Nearly 50 million seniors could stop receiving Social Security payments or see them delayed. Our troops would not know when they would get their next paycheck. We have 30 million families who rely on the monthly child tax credit, and they would not receive that relief, at least on time. And as we saw in 2011, when the debt ceiling was raised at the absolute last minute, and investor and consumer confidence was shaken in the run-up, we saw a marked increase in interest rates, a marked drop in the stock market, and when U.S. interest rates go up and the credit rating of the United States was downgraded, that means higher interest payments for everyone who has a loan, whether it's a small business, a homeowner with a mortgage, a credit card payment. Anyone who borrows would see higher interest costs of their debt.
We must raise the debt ceiling for the benefit of the American people. I don't care what party they're from. Let me go to Chairman Powell. Now, the Fed is rightfully focused on controlling inflation while boosting employment with the aim of guiding our economy back to its pre-pandemic normal. And at the European Central Forum, you mentioned that it's urgent for the Fed to resolve the tension between these two policy goals, since taming prices by raising interest rates would weaken our labor market. As the Fed considers its monetary policy, how will you manage the trade-offs between controlling prices and ensuring full employment? And how do you plan to resolve the tension between the two that you spoke on Wednesday?
That's the very difficult situation we find ourselves in. Almost all of the time, inflation is low when unemployment is high, and so interest rates work on both problems now. So right now we're far away from, we think, away from full employment. So that gives us an incentive to keep accommodative policy strong, to keep accommodative policy in place. Inflation is well above target, and we have an expectation that high inflation will abate because we think the factors that are causing it are temporary and tied to the